I'm going to kick off because we only have 55 minutes together. Briefly, kind of what we want to talk through today is the two programs that we're coming online with this year around circular design. And that's a professional diploma and also a master's. So I'm going to kick us off by talking a little bit about kind of the urgency for change, the need for circularity. What do we mean by circularity, and why do we feel that designers have a crucial role to play in the transition to a circular economy? Then we'll talk you through on a high level the professional diploma and the master's, and what both of those two things encompass and who they're geared towards, because they have slightly different kind of audiences or learners in mind. And then we'll also talk through the application requirements, discuss or touch on what we see as the kind of career opportunities coming off the back of this type of education, and then leave plenty of time at the end for a Q&A. So hopefully that will cover the most important parts. Very briefly, I'm Gwen Cunningham. I'm delighted to have a chance to talk to you today. I'm the lead for circularity and sustainability at ncad. Had the pleasure of joining just under 2 years ago. And my own background is in textile and fashion design. I actually studied at ncad way back when, so I'm an alumni, but have been working in the field of sustainability and circularity for the past decade, mostly over on mainland Europe, over in Amsterdam for the last 9 years. So really coming, I suppose, at this with a lot of industry experience, and that has really shaped as well the way that we've built both of these programs to be really steeped and embedded in practice and in, let's say, live industry knowledge. So what are these programs trying to kind of tackle and address? If you're here on the call, you're here because something about the world circular struck a chord with you, and probably you're already aware to some degree of kind of, let's say, the challenge that we're facing. And quite simply put, that challenge is that our entire economic system, our entire society is now built in what we call a linear way. So we take huge amount of resources, often finite resources, to make vast volumes of product, which we sell or we use for an increasingly short amount of time, and ultimately we waste. And this linear way of working has been in play for, you know, more than 100 years. And we're starting to understand and see that there are limits to this kind of extractive linear growth. And those limits are showing themselves in the environmental crisis, the climate emergency that we now find ourselves in. It's not a situation that is unique to textiles or to fashion. You know, actually most systems, most industrial sectors work in this way. And this complicated graphic explains that, I think, really well. This is a piece of research that was done over in Amsterdam in the work that I was doing there the last 10 years, trying to kind of capture or show what that linear system looks like on a global scale. So this is actually kind of an X-ray of our world. On the left-hand side here, you see all of the resources that we extract every year, whether that's minerals or ores or fossil fuels or biomass. And then this kind of colorful in between shows how those minerals are used, processed, designed into products and services that then serve the kind of societal needs that we have. So housing, communication, mobility, healthcare. And then this tiny little kind of gray stripe that you see at the very bottom, that is the resources that are actually being captured after they've been used, so at end of life, and re-injected back into the system as a secondary material. And what that research showed us, that analysis, it showed us that we are, as a world, we are 7.2% circular right now. So we have a huge circularity gap. This means, on the flip side, that we waste, you know, pretty much 98% of all resources. And this is hugely problematic. And on the flip side, it's a huge opportunity because it's an opportunity to do things differently. The reason we focus on textiles and fashion in the first iteration of these programs that we're launching this year is because, you know, the textiles industry is actually one of the heaviest hitters. It is kind of the poster child of the linear economy, taking vast volumes of fiber, land, water, chemicals to make textiles, making over 100 billion new items of clothing every year, using our clothing for half as long as we did 15 years ago, and then wasting pretty much 85% of all textiles is going to landfill or incineration. So we think that it is one of the most wasteful and pollutive industries in the world, but it's also one of the highest potential, you know, because it's one of the most creative, one of the most lucrative, one of the most consumer facing. So if we can use it as a blueprint for how to change a certain sector, then maybe it can act as an inspiration to other sectors. So we see it as a great entry point for change. And that kind of graphic, which maybe some of you are aware of, this is from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. It shows this kind of dynamic that we see within the industry right now, where we have a hyper acceleration of production and consumption, moving from 50 billion units to over 100 billion units in just 15 years. And then on the flip side, this blue line shows that we're have a decrease in utilization. So the amount of times that we actually wear our clothing is taking a drastic nosedive. So you see that there's a real issue to solve. We're not producing, consuming, using, or disposing of our textiles in a way that makes any logical sense right now. And for me, you know, one of the solutions is design, and better, smarter, more circular design. Perhaps some of you know this statistic. It's from the EU Commission's Eco-Design Directive from a few years ago. And their research showed that it's estimated that over 80% of all product-related environmental impacts are actually kind of determined at the design phase before production even begins. So what that means is that as designers, when we're making decisions about materials, colors, construction, all of these types of things, we're already locking in the environmental impact. So there's a, you know, that gives us a huge amount of responsibility on one hand as designers to make good decisions, but also a huge amount of power, you know, and I think we are in a really critical moment where designers are needed to solve some of these huge environmental and social challenges that we're faced with. So when we talk about circular design, we're talking about moving from that linear system, take, make, use, waste, to a system where we are designing out waste and pollution from the outset, where we're ensuring that all the materials and products that have been made are being used for as long as possible, and when we're proactively regenerating our natural systems. And this graphic very simply kind of tries to illustrate what it means. So we're repairing and reusing, reselling, remanufacturing, recycling. And what that does, of course, is that it diminishes the kind of extraction, the dependency on virgin materials and resources, and all of the social and environmental impact that comes with those virgin resources. And it's also diminishing the amount of waste at the end of use of the value chain. But also good to kind of emphasize that sometimes when we talk about circular design, people automatically think that it's about designing products differently, but really there's different ways that we can apply design principles. So we can think about redesigning materials, for instance, so that we're using materials that are safe, recycled, and made from renewable inputs. We can redesign products, of course, so that we're designing products with minimal waste, designing products that are going to last, that have high longevity and durability, and designing products that are made to be made again. So this is this whole emergent field of design for cyclability, recyclability. But then finally, and not to be underestimated at all, is the need to design systems to be circular. So how do we actually build the business models and the systems and the infrastructure so that we do in fact keep materials and products kind of flowing at their highest level, and also keep people functioning at their highest potential? So to give a really kind of clear or simple example of that, you know, you can design a product. Let's say you design a pair of jeans to be 100% recyclable. That's great in theory, but they're only recyclable in theory unless there is actually a system in place to collect the denim, to repair the denim, to reuse the denim, to recycle the denim. So that's what we mean when we talk about circular systems, is that kind of underlying business model and infrastructure that actually enables the circular flow of materials and products. Something's been cut off here. This should say circularity as a strategic imperative. You know, what we're seeing at the moment, I think, is that there's a huge movement within industry towards circularity, but also that this is being accelerated by increased commitment at a government level to circularity. And this is perfectly kind of seen in the textile strategy that was launched by the EU last March, which is a really ambitious piece of work. They published a vision for 2030 that all textile products placed in the EU market by 2030 would be long-lived and recyclable, made from recycled fibers, free of hazardous substances, and produced with respect to social rights and the environment. So this is, you know, not only a vision, but more importantly, there's a set of very concrete measures that are being proposed, which includes things like separately collected textile waste in all EU member states by 2025, eco-design product regulation, which will specify particular circular performance requirements for all products coming on the market. So things like durability, repairability, recyclability, they won't be nice to have anymore. They will be actually stipulated and required by law. And also things like digital product passports. And this is going to really put a huge amount of wind in our sails when it comes to, you know, seeing a huge uptake in these circular principles across the industry. So really preparing ourselves for the advance and the implementation of these policies as designers, and getting ahead of the curve by training ourselves up on these topics and on these kind of core principles is really key. We had the kind of luxury and pleasure of already developing a program and launching a program last year with DCCI and with the support of Circulera. And this was really a program that was trying to train up current professionals across the textiles and fashion industry in Ireland. So we wanted to kind of dip our toe in the water and test a new type of education with industry. And this first cohort were a combination of 12 different companies from all over Ireland. You see some of their logos here. And around them, outside of the 12 companies that went through the core program, we also built a community of practice, which was this larger network of stakeholders who are also kind of dedicated to the topic of circularity. And that created an even bigger kind of network of different stakeholders. And just to kind of give you a sense of this first program that we ran, because it might give you a little bit of a flavor of what to expect when it comes to the master's and the professional diploma that we're launching this year. So the Circular by Design program that we launched last year ran over the course of roughly 6 months. It was a series of masterclasses that really guided the core participants along a kind of a circular innovation process. So the first masterclass, we went to a waste sorting facility and we saw the end of use supply chain in action. So really understanding what happens to textiles and fashion when we say goodbye to it. The second masterclass, or actually it was the first in-person masterclass, Initiate, was really training up the cohort on the core principles of circular design and circular economy, and getting them to start to assess their own practice and their own businesses to understand, where am I doing things well and where could I do things better? Then we started to ideate, so to, based on kind of the assessment that we'd done, identify hotspots for change and innovation, and the different companies started to develop new circular concepts, whether those were around materials or products or systems. And then finally, the third master class was really about implementation. So taking those conceptual models and starting to develop prototype plans, and kind of a roadmap for implementation, plans on how to engage and kind of onboard their customers, etc. So all of that work is viewable online if you're interested to kind of see the individual case studies of the companies that went through it. You can find it in our toolbox, which is linked there below. And you could also see, excuse me, the kind of circular concepts that the different companies came up with. And these concepts are also really in the market already. So we saw from that work that there was a huge appetite and interest in circular design, and a real need, I suppose, to develop that kind of circular mindset and skill set in the industry. And it was really off the back of that that we started to work into the development of the professional diploma and the master's program. So with that, I'm actually going to hand over to Bernie, who's going to tell us a bit about both of these and take it from there.
Hi, thanks, Gwen. Thanks for that really detailed outline of the programme. It's really good. So my name's Bernie McCoy, and I will be working alongside the academics in developing some, or supporting them to develop the programmes that are being launched this year with ncad and the Creative Futures Academy. So you will, if you sign up to any of these programs, I will be a point of contact for you in any of that support mechanism that we offer. So just to give you a little bit of an outline of what you can expect and the sort of nuts and bolts of these things in the background. The professional diploma, as in all cases, and if you've been attending some of the other talks today, you'll probably have some of this information in terms of the diplomas that are on offer. It's accredited of 20 credits, and this is at a level 9, which is a master's level. So the professional diploma does sit at that master's level. We will confirm the date shortly, and it is also, again, as Gwen described, some hybrid offering and some in person. So we will be structuring it that way in terms of meeting the needs of those who are, maybe working as well as studying, and just giving that flexibility. One of the reasons for a lot of these launches of new program provision is also we've been listening to some of the students, some of the challenges that sit at the moment within the education sector, in terms of those who need to study and pay rents and be full-time students, is really proving very difficult for students, particularly even at this sort of master's stage of study. So these flexible sort of learning models and groups of programs allow that flexibility where you can work and study at the same time. The diploma, you will see later on, forms a part of it sort of is structured in a way that it sits within the overall structure that ncad is offering in terms of their new provision. So this particular diploma in circular by design at the moment is looking towards the textile sector, and although, as Gwen referred to earlier, this is the sort of the beginning of something that we will develop out into other areas. So it's one where we would like to test the waters and provide a provision in that space, and then spread it, as I say, across a lot of the other sectors. So if it's something that you're interested and you're not necessarily within the textile space, it is something to keep an eye on in terms of how we develop this and going forward. So yeah, so I mean, it covers, as Gwen has sort of outlined, many of the sort of regulations and the need for circularity. And if you have any further questions on this, that's absolutely fine. The fees at the moment are the 2,200. That's where we've set it. What I would suggest to you though is that there are quite a lot of funding opportunities elsewhere. And if you're part of any other organisation or any other state provision, or if you're in support of other membership to organisations such as IDI, or maybe Design and Crafts Council, the Arts Council, there are many organisations that fund CPD, and it would be definitely worth your while looking into those. Some of the local enterprise offices may also consider this as a potential opportunity to onboard most of you in what's happening in the contemporary area, and that you're up to speed in this space, as it's highly important. Government is really pushing forward for this knowledge to be out there in terms of our industries as a whole. So I would be very proactive in looking if you would like to see if you can source some funding, sponsorship or opportunity there in terms of your CPD. So Gwen, maybe move on to the next one. So again, this just gives you a little bit of an outline of how the structure might work in terms of a trimester. Ideally, we've broken it down into 5 credits sections, so this is more manageable, and I think it's a good way of you sort of, I suppose, chewing off small bits and then moving through the process in this part-time capacity. So if you are a full-time student, for instance, you would normally cover 30 credits within a trimester. In this instance, you'll be looking at doing 15 credits and then a 5 credit in the second trimester, depending on when we start the program. We have to confirm that at the moment. The design principles module, as Gwen pointed out, in terms of what's really important and what's at the understanding those key issues, those key elements, and it gives you a really good foundational introduction to the program of study. And as you go through, each module builds on to the next and gives you that insight and knowledge to be able to come out at the other end in terms of the self-directed piece, in terms of that design capstone. As you can see, there's an exit point of a Prof cert, and I will mention this, that we've placed that in there because things happen. People may, for whatever reason, we hope it doesn't, but when you sign up to a program of study, this will allow you that if something does happen and you need to exit, that you can exit at that point. And you will get a certificate, providing obviously that everything is all good and that it and you have completed the study successfully. The 4 modules together, then it will give you the professional dip. So you exit then in the second trimester with a professional diploma. So that will just give you a sense of the time frame. The other bit that might be interesting for you is that each of these 5 credits constitutes 100 hours approximately of your time. 20 hours of that would be in terms of class and interaction time with your tutors and visiting lecturers and other activities that will be designed to be delivered throughout the programme. So each one of them, as I say, is 100 hours in total. 20 of those hours will be contact time and 80 hours will be of your own time. Now, obviously that we estimate that you can do lots more than that if you've got the time, but that's what we would recommend would be a commitment to allow you to successfully complete what you need to do within the course requirements and the learning outcomes. So the again, the masters, then you can see it's 90 credits in terms of what you'll be asked to do. Again, it's at the level 9, and we are looking to start this in October. So again, it'll be a mixture of online and on campus. We are hoping, we are looking at that you would need a commitment here of at least 1 to 2, it could be 2 most months, but 1 to 2 days on campus to be able to succeed in this particular program of study. Each of those modules are, and we will go into that in a few minutes, but they're all broken down into a similar commitment. And again, if check out if you qualify for any SUSE grants or anything like that, because that will actually aid you in terms of that financial piece. So again, this one is looking at anybody that's a graduate that has a background in design, that has some knowledge of the textile sector. And again, we'd be looking at what your activities has been over the last while. You may well have some learning that you can bring towards it. So, and we will look at that as well. So so I think you could move on from that one. And again, just to give you a bit of a structure on this piece and give you oversight what the expectation would look like. You can see it's 15 credits again per trimester, and it would be delivered in a part-time capacity over the 6 trimesters. You'll be doing, quite a few different projects. So each of these modules, you're assigned a certain amount and body of work that you have to complete, and you're assessed on each of those as you work your way through the program. What's quite lovely about this is that at each stage, you know where you are. You have your results. You kind of can monitor where you're sitting, how you're getting on, and as you move then into the next trimester. In the last 2 trimesters, you'll see quite a large block where you've got 15 credits in each of those. So you have a block of a project in each of those areas, which will actually be mostly self-directed, and a lot of that will come from the learning of the previous workshops, the previous projects and modules that you've completed. So what we hope that will happen is that a student on a master's program will come in with some idea of what they want to do. And by the time they get the fundamentals and the scaffolding in place with all of the other content of the previous modules, by the time you exit into this trimester 5 and 6, you'll be well equipped to drive your personal vision for what you want to do with the support of the team. So that's sort of the structure, and if anybody has any questions on that, I would gladly answer those. So in terms of this piece, you will again look at sort of you can sort of see what's here in terms of the urgency for change, and Gwen has sort of explained that quite well. I don't know if you want to talk to this piece, Gwen, in terms of your content.
Yeah, I can. So I think the let's say ethos and overarching learning objectives of both the professional diploma and the master's are relatively similar. So on one hand, it's really about learning and understanding the urgency for change, building that kind of foundational and nuanced understanding of what circular economy is, what circular design is. So you'll be learning the different circular design strategies, how the circular economy framework and kind of concept links in with other sustainability frameworks, economic frameworks and design frameworks, and really getting that in-depth knowledge of circular materials, design, business models, international trends, best practice, certification, regulation, and of course the kind of practical challenges and drivers of implementing these things in practice. So it's a lot of that, you saw in what Bernie presented, those early stages is really building up that kind of foundational knowledge. The second is really that it's built on principles of innovation. It's really going to help you to explore the current impact of your business or your design practice, identify kind of hotspots for circular innovation, and then start to proactively design or redesign kind of key value propositions using circular design principles as that guiding principle. And then develop, test, iterate, prototypes and concepts, and start to actually build out kind of roadmaps to scaling and launching these things in the market, which also involves customer research and insights and that kind of customer engagement strategy. And then finally, connection. So I think key to circularity is always, collaboration. You will have seen from what we presented earlier that we've already got quite an active network of stakeholders around us, and those will be your community of practice. So we will be pulling in expertise from national and international partners and experts at various different stages, but also giving you a chance to put yourself on a platform by participating in events, exhibitions, keynote panels, etc. So there will be that kind of give and take in terms of engaging with the external world and the real world, and not being an kind of insular research focused master's or professional diploma. Absolutely not. I think it's really built on practice and collaboration. Back to you, Bernie.
That's great, thanks. And again, just in terms of, I alluded to this earlier on, in terms of what the requirements might be, because it's a level 9, which is a master's level program. There are certain, obviously, requirements that we would like to see. So again, an undergrad, approved undergrad of 2.2. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that it has to be in this specialism. You could have a 2.2 that relates to it, I would say, and so long as the work or the bachelor degree it gives you that understanding in terms of what's expected at a level 9. It gives you that sort of level 8 understanding. So primarily it needs to sit within a space that you have understanding, but I wouldn't necessarily go, you have to have in a very specific thing. It can be something that, it could be a different creative space, but you've found your way then going forward in another space that sits where you could actually continue your master's studies. So we have had some applicants that are coming from a slightly different space, and they find themselves with a master's qualification that is kind of interesting, that they're bringing an alternative viewpoint to it. So don't necessarily think because it's not in a very textile based undergrad that you can't move into a postgrad in that space. I would make the inquiry and present that to us. If you don't meet that academic requirement, you can do a prior learning application. And this is really, again, sits in that space where you've got a bit of flexibility around what you've previously done. So again, you might have an undergrad in something completely different, but you're learning from that, or you've been involved in a number of different projects that are related to the area, or that gives you certain insights and certain experience that would actually be really valuable in the space and will contribute. And you can articulate that in terms of an application form or an application to the program. We will review anybody that has actually, anybody that applies that we think would fit what we're trying to do. We will absolutely consider them, but we won't accept anybody that we feel is not suitable, that they're, that they maybe haven't got the prior knowledge or ability at this point in time to proceed. So, sometimes it might be timing, it might be just where you are in your career, but we look at those applications and give you the advice that that will send you on the correct path. So the programs, you need to you can actually apply online, log in, do all of that. You'll be given a as we say here, conditional offer if everything meets that standard or meets what our requirements are. And then when you send everything in, we give you the full offer and we're all ready to go. The interview stage, generally speaking, for a master's program, we would interview you, and it sometimes might happen, particularly if, again, that piece that I'm saying, that you may not have an undergrad that is in, say, fashion textiles, but in another space, but you're really interesting. And we'd like to kind of sort of hear, well, what have you got to say? You know, what's your idea? What's your concept behind why you might think this master suits you? So the interview stage, you may or may not have to do that. It depends on, again, whether we feel we need more information, or whether on paper and whether your previous qualifications just hits all the targets that we need in that regard. Okay, and then go ahead, next one. Okay, so the state, for the professional dip and the MA, so the 500 words framing is really important. So it's your sort of rationale for actually wanting to do this particular master's. You know, what are you intending to get out of it? And just kind of to give us that detail, because ultimately what we want is a cohort of students that fit together, that can interact and bounce off each other. And peer learning as part of it, all our programs here in ncad is really important to us. So we want a group of students that really connect and interact with each other, and that there's a good buzz there, and there's a good sort of energy in the room. And I think that this statement is how we can determine that. So I think it's really important to re-express yourself in your sort of want and willingness to get involved in that space. A CV obviously is really useful in terms of how we determine what you've been up to for the last while, where it fits, and how that might again sit in that classroom space. The transcripts you will be able to get from your previous university. You just need to contact them, and they will provide those for you very quickly. And then any other certs degrees, other qualifications from any other institutions. So you may well have completed other programs, you know, professional dips, certs that have been validated, or even just supported by other institutions or other agencies that may be a professional body of sorts. So any of those things are really, really good as a support mechanism for us to understand, you know, where you're sitting, where you're coming from. And we will be looking for a diverse group. You know, it's not, we don't necessarily want the same sort of profile. You know, I mean, that sort of lends itself to being a little bit sort of not as interesting as we were. So the more diverse group, the more sort of dynamic group that we have, I think it will also make everybody else's interaction more interesting. The English language piece is a requirement if English isn't your first language, and we will look for that. So if you are in a situation where English isn't your first language, I would start looking to see about getting that other qualification. And because ultimately everything is taught through English, so it is something that we would require, mainly for you to get the best out of the program from that point of view. So anything at all that you can read through these, but anything at all that you feel is really important as evidence of your previous work, you can upload here. We're not going to dictate what that is. You know, everybody has a very varied career to date, particularly if you've been out of education for a while. You might go, oh my gosh, you know, do I really have to put a portfolio of work in? Haven't done one of those since I was, you know, whatever. So use the experience that you've had to date, you know, collate that in a way that's presentable, that's readable, that's exciting, that's, you know, informative, all of those things. So don't be necessarily turned off when you see a portfolio. When we refer to that, particularly for the MA, a portfolio is not necessarily your traditional portfolio. It really is, what have you been up to? How have you documented that? How can I put it together in a really interesting, cohesive way that's going to get across my love or my interest in this particular space? So, on why you might want to do something. Even some elements that you may not think are directly related to this, but your approach might have been really interesting in that space. You know, please put those things in. It's yeah, it really, we can't necessarily tell you exactly what to do in this space, because you're all going to submit something a little bit varied and a little bit different, and that's what we want you to do. So, yeah. And I might pass you back on this one, Gwen.
Yeah, sure. It kind of was mentioned to us that sometimes it's helpful to give a bit of insight into the types of career opportunities that might stem from having gone through a program like this. Of course, you know, if you're coming to us for the professional diploma, the likelihood is that, you know, you're going to really apply what you learn to your own brand or practice or within the organization that you're already with. But it could also be a point of departure, you know, for a new career path. And of course, the masters will hopefully really give you that deep specialism that allows you to totally orientate yourself towards this. And I've been working in this field for a long time now and seeing kind of how this topic has started to really shape the job market in a way that actually I never even would have anticipated 5 years ago. So I thought the most interesting thing to do would be to look at the types of roles that I'm seeing coming by kind of my purview when I'm out there interacting with people kind of in the industry, but also even just in what we're seeing on things like LinkedIn more and more. So one is obviously this deep specialism and expertise in circular design. And this would really come into play when you look at new roles in product development and design kind of, yeah, within organizations, existing brands like ASOS, you know, PVH, who manage Tommy Hilfiger, Calvin Klein, and so on, but also in kind of a research capacity. So for instance, RCA recently advertising for a postdoctoral researcher specialized in circular design supply chains. So this is kind of one field that we're seeing a lot of appetite for. It used to be the case that, you know, within a large organization, you might have a sustainability team who kind of owned the topic and were advising all of the respective business units within a brand on how to become more sustainable and more circular. And now we're seeing that they're starting to actually kind of hire for that specific expertise within the design and production business units themselves, rather than within the sustainability teams. So that's really promising and something that we're seeing a big trend towards. The second is more in kind of circular textile innovation, and that can often be quite a kind of scientific role, as you'll see here. So it's everything from sustainable and responsible sourcing to raw material innovation, technician roles, sustainable innovation manager and caring. So again, you know, I think there's a real move towards alternative and sustainable materials at the moment. And a lot of brands within the fashion textile space are building up internal capacity to be able to not only source those materials, but also actually proactively develop those materials in-house. So more of a research and innovation kind of capacity. Of course, sustainability manager, corporate sustainability, innovation management, environmental sustainability. This is also an emerging field. I think that no company anymore who doesn't have a role like this or multiple roles like this within their organizations. And this is something that really draws on that kind of business model innovation piece that is quite heavily emphasized within both the programs. And then just thought I'd throw it in there because it just is a real example of how these roles are really evolving day by day. You can imagine that as the circular economy starts to take hold, when it comes to things like the advance of the resale or secondhand market or the recycling market and field, that very niche roles are coming online at the moment, especially around the whole space of authenticating secondhand product and kind of the specialism that comes with that whole reverse logistics supply chain around kind of repair, remanufacturing, cleaning, remerchandising, reselling. And this is just a handful of examples of that that I thought might be interesting to share. Feel free to just reach out to us directly. If it's content related, I think I'm the best woman to talk to, but if it's to do with the actual kind of, the nuts and bolts, as Bernie said, of the application process and that type of thing, then I would reach out to Bernie. And of course, for administration questions, we have a separate email for that.